that way you guys can hear us better?
Thank you.
Thank you so
You get a
much.
devil fruit. But the imaginary kind, because we don't have any.
You'll have to go find it yourself. But it'll be all yours. Do you want to?
Yes, so. Hello, everybody. Welcome to We Are One Piece Psychology. That I totally like how that just works out that way. I wish I could take credit for that, but actually that was the idea of my brother who was going to join us. We were going to have two other panelists with us, but due to the situations in LA, they weren't able to make it. So I will give them a shout out after we introduce ourselves. My name is Dr. Benjamin Times. I am a registered psychological associate. I work in clinical and forensic psychology, and I am the co-host of two mental health related podcasts. One is called Mental Health Quest, The Therapist's Office and Beyond, and the other is called My Hero Therapy.
And I am Dr. Elizabeth Sanchez-Orbizu, and I'm the founder and CEO of Psychology for Geeks, which is a nonprofit organization where we blend hobbies and mental health. I don't know if you guys saw our booth here, but if you have not, please stop by. We have a really cool setup, and we can provide more information about what we do if you guys are interested.
And our two missing pirates were one is my brother, Dr. Isaac Tights, who is the president and CEO of All Mind Health, a psychological corporation here in California. They see patients throughout the state of California via telehealth, as well as in person here in Southern California. And then our good friend, Dr. Sarah Roldan, who is the host of the Our Community Oasis podcast, where she talks about mental health, Latina culture, immigrant issues, and all sorts of amazing, wonderful self-care things. So we are sad that they aren't here, but we had arranged with them. Keep an eye out on the YouTube channels for Psychology for Geeks and All Mind Health. We will be doing a panel about using geek interests to help take care of yourself during times of crisis and emergencies. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, so we actually had a great suggestion from someone in the crowd earlier, what we could talk about today. But before we get to that, I wanted you guys to tell me a little bit about what you like about One Piece. So I have a couple of questions I would like to ask you. So can you guys just shout out who the best waifu is in the One Piece universe?
Vivi.
Nico Robin.
Obviously Zoro.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That person wins.
There you go.
Zoro is definitely the best.
Loyal. What else do you want?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, if we're going to talk, but okay, no, I'm not going to go there.
All right. The coolest devil fruit power.
The jacket no me.
No.
There's a lot of like really out there ones, and now I can't really think of any of them.
Yeah.
Fake fan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Laza's pretty cool.
Yes, that one is a really good one. The one that I really like is Crocs. Like he has a really cool one, Sam. Like anything that manipulates the elements. I'm not a major like Avatar fan. Sorry.
No, not at all. It's not like we did a panel on that at Comic-Con.
Any other like really cool devil fruit powers?
Enerus from Skypea.
Yeah.
The lightning one.
Oh
Lightning.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
That's
Yeah.
a really good word.
It was just unfortunate that he had to deal with Luffy at the time.
That's what all the villains say,
Yeah.
right? Unfortunately, that pesky kid.
It's almost like Scooby-Doo in a sense. He would have gotten away with it if it weren't for that meddling Luffy.
No wait, but there's another one that turns everything into like food, right? Like it was for I just read it. That's why I remember. Yeah, I think I would like that one. Turns everything into food. Okay. So my other question is, can you guys do your favorite One Piece laugh? Unfortunately, I have only read the manga, so I actually don't know what the laughs sound like. That's why I was like, tell me what the sound like.
Someone give us a laugh.
Wait, what's the one, the guy from Thriller Bark?
Moria?
Yeah, Moria. Okay. All right, last question. Favorite island?
Skypia.
Okay.
How does not, like, I feel like if I were to live there, I would just like have diabetes. Like, I would just not be able to stop myself from eating chocolate.
I don't see a problem with that. Chocolate, always good.
Skypia is really cool though.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the chocolate island. That's where I will live and die.
Yeah.
What are your favorite character that like you didn't think you were gonna like?
Oh, that's a good one.
I mean,
Like when you first saw them, you were probably like weird, but then like later on you loved them.
Bartolomeo.
Ooh, Bartholomew. I heard someone right.
Sorrow.
Zoro.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just kind of like, oh, you know, yeah, he's the muscle guy.
You're like,
And then he started like sparring wisdom and be like really cool, and I'm like, all right.
Okay. So actually, I didn't like Luffy at first, cause I just like the trope of like the goofy main character just so overdone in my opinion, and I was just like. Also, he does not act with logic. He's just way too impulsive, and I'm just like, why? But you know, you grow to love him. So
I think it's when the moment calls for him to be serious and like take charge. He does a really good job
Yeah.
at that, and I think it's lovable because then yes, I also get like very upset when there's like characters who are like just going against, so they're like super goofy all the time. They're like, yeah, everything will work out. And he's still like very much like, okay, I will listen to people when they tell me don't do that. Most of the time.
for me, it's Bon Clay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, cool. So we're actually gonna dive a little bit deeper into the suggestions that we had, that we totally thought about ourselves.
So, one of the lovely members of the audience had asked us to talk about how the different characters deal with trauma. Because, you know, trauma is not something that therapists talk about ever. I've never spoken about trauma, never, not at all. And it's not like pirates ever deal with trauma, so I think this is going to be a very easy topic. I actually am going to bring this back to the issue of Luffy and his goofiness. I would argue that that's actually his coping skill. Like, his life has been a lot of insecurity, a lot of like instability, but he copes with it by being fun-loving and always trying to like make things to be good, even when they're not. And he's like the eternal optimist. So I guess it really shows a lot of his like resilience. And it can be really difficult for people to maintain that sense of optimism when the world is burning down around you. But it is also a highly valuable skill to have to, even when things are tough, let's laugh, let's goof around, let's have some fun.
Yeah. And I actually going to expand on that because then now I'm thinking about like the siblings essentially. So Luffy, Ace, I forgot the Sabo. There you go. Because they each, I mean, they all kind of have like a very similar upbringing, but they all dealt with it a little bit different, right? Because Sabo went into like this ideology, right? Like he always had this ideology of what he wanted to do, and that's why essentially he left his family. And he continued to have that, and that's what allowed him to sort of like cope with everything that was going on in the world. But Ace wanted to find a family. He wanted to find a community. And even though they were sort of like sworn siblings, or whatever, they all kind of went, off on their own and found what worked best for them. And I think a lot of the time, especially nowadays, because there's so much information on mental health online, we tend to have this idea of, okay, well, these are the self-care things that people are suggesting online, so I'll try them. And then we get very discouraged when they don't work. But you kind of have to find something that works for you. Like every time, like even in sessions, I always tell the individuals I'm working with, I'm like, okay, we're gonna start with this. If it doesn't work, we'll change it until something works, right? Because we have to make sure that it fits your lifestyle, that it's something that you enjoy doing, and it's something that could, like be really helpful. Because there are things that are not as helpful as we want them to be as well. So we have to be
Like that
careful.
rigid ideology.
The what?
Like the rigid ideology. So I'm going to bounce off of that. So there are many different ways to cope with trauma and adversity and stress. And they're all valid in the sense that they are all efforts to cope. What happens is at some point they become what's called maladaptive, or no longer serving you in the way that it was intended. And for some people, like, what's it, Stavros? Not Stavros.
Sabo?
The brother, the rigid ideology brother.
Sabo.
Saba. I knew it started with an S sound. So he sticks with his ideas and is really firmly rooted in those ideologies. And it works for him, but sometimes when we get caught up in the idea of what we think things should be, that is when we can get discouraged when things aren't working out for us, because we get stuck in this, like, no, it should be this. And that goes along with what you were saying about in the cultural zeitgeist right now on the internet, there's all these websites and apps and everything for self-care and mental health and all sorts of things, and people are like, okay, well, this should work. If I do the meditation, it should work. If I take a bubble bath, it should work. And if it doesn't, we start to beat ourselves up. We start to blame ourselves for something that maybe that just wasn't the right thing for us. And then that actually adds to our trauma experience, is because now we're fighting ourselves in addition to whatever else is coming down on us.
There's so many things I want to add to that.
But I'm going to say one more thing about, especially the characters in One Piece. The whole concept, I think, of the pirates is an effort for them to cope with the reality of the world that they live in. Not all the islands have everything that they need. The government not so good at their job of taking care of people.
That's an
You know,
understatement.
I'm hedging my bets in case someone from the government is listening. But when situational things like this happen that are outside of our control, the number one thing that humans do is we try to gain control over some aspect of our lives. And the act of piracy, of looking out for myself only, that is, in effect, a form of coping. Sometimes it works out really well, like with Luffy's crew. And then there are other crews that are not as good at taking care of themselves.
I think it really depends. I actually asked this question earlier, and please answer if you know. Are all or most of the pirate captains, are they really responsible for their crews most of the time? Or most of them couldn't care less about it, as long as they're still in power? Because I just recently read where I think it was Law and Kid, they were very upset about what happened to their crew members. And then I was like, oh yeah, cool. And I'm like, yeah, Luffy does that all the time, right? And everyone in Luffy's crew does that all the time. And I'm like, okay, but does every pirate captain do that? Or is it just some of them?
It's just
Some of them.
Some of them? Okay.
One big one is Kuro, the black cat.
Yeah, I was gonna
Went
say.
out and killed most of his.
He killed his own crew because they got in his way. Yeah.
I was gonna say, Hawkins, he uses his crew as basically shields.
Oh, yes.
But then in some ways he's like, I'm sorry. And his crew's looking at him, he's like, we're all gonna die. He's like, don't worry, I got this. And then they all just get
Yeah.
fucking with his fruit. And
But he said he's sorry, so it's okay, right?
he's responsible, but No, he's selfish as fuck.
Yeah.
Also.
But,
Well-
but that's kind of like an indication though, like the way that the captains treat like their community or their crew, it kind of indicates whether or not they're gonna like stay in power, right? Because those captains are usually the ones that face Luffy and do not like it, right? And eventually like fall. And the ones that stay with Luffy or the ones that stay in power are the ones that have like a very healthier, I would say, a healthier sort of view of like their community and their power. But one thing I wanted to talk about today as well, because I don't want to just stay in talking about like how the characters that are fictional cope with trauma. I want to talk about how us being fans of One Piece helps with trauma as well. And this is when we kind of have to talk about that balance between a good coping skill and something that can become
Maladaptive. So
Maladaptive.
a adaptive or helpful coping or maladaptive or not helpful coping. It's not either good or bad. I don't like to, when I have clients tell me, oh, it's not a good coping skill. It's still a coping skill. And give yourself credit for that. So it's not that it's good or bad, because judgment labels like that only serve to add to our sense of shame when we don't feel like we're getting what we thought we should. But if we're just saying, okay, well, this one, it just isn't as helpful, it's still coping, you're still doing something. And, you know, also it's really important to understand that when we're talking about coping with trauma, there's big T trauma and little t trauma. So big T trauma is the clinical trauma, which is a like near-death experience, basically something that shatters your sense of safety in the world, physically and psychologically. Either it could be one-time event, like a car accident, or ongoing things like living in a war zone or abuse or anything like that. Then there are smaller little t traumas that just really break down at our ability to maintain our sense of self. That it's not just anything that goes wrong as a trauma, but things that are hurtful to our values can be traumatic. And the ways we cope with them is going to be different, but using fan interests like One Piece is one way that anybody, regardless of the trauma that they're experiencing, can find a way to cope.
Yes.
So, one thing that I'm sure you do this with your clients also, but when I have clients who like anything, but we're going to focus on One Piece here. So, let's imagine hypothetically, and I say hypothetically because I'm not your therapist. So, you know, everything I say is not considered therapy advice. This is just general mental health advice. But if I was to be seeing any one of you guys in session, I would ask you about your interest in One Piece. I would ask you to tell me what you like about it, what draws you to it. Tell me about the characters that you identify with. And with One Piece, one thing that I've found to be really helpful for some of my clients is that sense of finding out one's place in the world, finding one's strengths, and building community. Those themes I've seen with clients that's what they like cling to. That's what draws them in. A lot of people love Zoro because he's very brave, but he's also very caring towards his friends. He might act aloof at times, but like if you're in danger, he will be there for you. Nami.
If he's not lost.
You know, but like, he's not. He's doing the best he can. Or like Nami, you know, she seems really independent. She doesn't let other people, you know, control her destiny. But that she will still join in with the group when it's the right thing for her. And that can be a really powerful message for a lot of people who, in a world where we sometimes feel like we don't have control, seeing a character like Nami or Zoro find their place in a world where they don't have control can be helpful for us as well.
I actually, somebody shouted it out, but you said, who's the character that you identify with? Go ahead, shout it out. Who are the characters that you're like, yeah, he's like me for real, for real?
Vivi.
Vivi? he's been on it for a while.
It's a little guy in a box, man.
Any other characters like you're really,
So like when you
Like
see him, like I
connected?
feel them.
yeah.
Kobe.
Kobe, yeah.
Rocinante.
Ooh, nice. So I'm gonna ask you guys a question then, is when you look at those characters, is it that you see yourself in the character, or do you see what you would like to be in that character?
I kind of see myself, like, especially someone who's like previously, like, you know, when I was younger, just like really cowardice, and then to kind of grow as I've gone into adult and make a lot of friends along the way in a lot of different communities. I think that's kind of what Cody goes through, especially since he's working for the other side, but he's still to an extent supports Luffy because Luffy's there too. And I, in my life, kind of have one of those friends who is Luffy, and that is just kind of relatable to my story.
Yeah. Wow.
Good.
When we first meet Vivi, she's like, one of the things that literally punches out of her is that she's always putting everybody's feelings first and doesn't ask for help. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of us identify with that, I think.
She identified with Vivi and I identify with Kobe, oh my god.
So maybe in the show of hands, if you don't want to like shout out who the character is, but in our everyday society, IRL, if the character that you identify with, would they be considered the good guy or the bad guy? Let's go with good guys first. Okay, some of you about a third of the room. What about the villains? Who identifies a bit more with the villains? Be honest, come on, it has to be the rest of the, okay. Because I think there is this misconception as to like, let me just tell you a story. So yesterday I was at the booth and we met someone who had this amazing Blackbeard cosplay. And I was like, hey, can you take a picture of your cosplay for our social media? And they said yes. And I said, I don't really like the character, but the cosplay is amazing. And they're like, yeah, a lot of people don't identify with him. And then I was like, wait, I'm not done with the series. So I'm like, maybe does he get better? And I was told he gets worse. So I'm like, all right, I don't think my opinion is gonna change very much of him. But there are certain traits, like even if they're like the worst like villain possible, there are traits that we can identify with. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the whole end of humanity kind of thing, or like, do whatever it takes to be in power. It's more like the suffering or the things that their backstory is something that you really relate to. Because that's something like for me, I kind of started with, I am so in love with Sanji's backstory. But I mean, if he just stopped and like this womanizer thing, like he will be just like perfect. Yeah. So I'm kind of like, okay, I can see why a lot of people like Zoro.
So, one thing I talk to clients about, if they tell me that they identify with the villain, I always tell them that that's totally fine, that's okay. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with you, it doesn't mean that you're a psychopath or anything like that. Because what I've seen for a lot of my clients who identify with villains, is the villain gets to do what they want. They're not bound by the rules of society. And I don't know about you, but there have definitely been times that I wish I didn't have to follow the rules of society. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to break those rules. It doesn't mean I'm going to kill someone or anything like that. It just means that I get it. And in this universe, Blackbeard took his life the way he wanted it. He didn't listen to what morals were or anything like that. And sometimes just that act of, you know what, I'm going to do what I want. That only give myself pleasure. Be selfish. We are all allowed to be selfish at times. I know it's become, it's a really kind of dichotomous thing, is we talk about self-care, but then we also talk about like, oh, you shouldn't be selfish. Self-care is selfish, and it is supposed to be that way, and you are okay to be selfish.
And you don't have to earn it either.
Yeah, you don't have to earn
anything.
it. You earned it just by existing.
Yes.
So I really want to preface that, because when people look at the villains, they're like, oh, well, they get to do what they want, and like, look, Blackbeard is in power, like, he's the strongest there, like, I want to be that way. So what we can try to do is we want to just think about what can I do in my life that allows me to feel like I have some sense of power. That obviously does not include committing crimes, preferably.
I think there is this, because we talked about coping, right? Like how it's not really right or wrong, it's just coping, because coping allows us to survive, right? And again, in the world of pirates, everyone's just sort of like trying to do the best that they can and survive in the best way that they can. And a lot of them chose a really horrible way of doing that. I'm talking about Doflamingo. And I mean, yes, he survived and he is the worst. And but sometimes that's what we end up doing, right? In our everyday life, we end up not choosing the best or the healthiest option available to us. Sometimes it's because we didn't know any better. Sometimes it was because this is the only path that will allow me to survive. Or sometimes it's because everyone in my community is doing the same thing. So yes, I'm gonna go into using substances. I'm gonna go into, using violence or, mistreating other people or doing whatever it takes to be able to like make it to the top, right? And then sometimes when we end up in the session or we have that, moment of like, hey, I think we need to change our life a little bit, then we start blaming ourselves for, I could have, should have, I would have done different. But we all do the best that we can to survive at that time, right? So we kind of have to also be very compassionate to ourselves. So go for it, just...
Well, and we're not saying this to excuse anything that the villains do. We are explaining it. My previous job was actually working with offenders and people on parole who committed really bad crimes. And one thing that actually I see between them and villains that you see in anime and in comics and everything is they see themselves as a victim of circumstances, of the hero, of society, whatever. What happens if you get caught up in this identity of being a victim is then you don't have any agency. If you're always the victim, then you have no control in your life, and that means that you're not responsible for your own growth.
It's always someone's fault.
It's always someone else's fault. And so it's really important, even when we have been victimized or have been victims of crime or trauma or anything like that, that we strive to maintain an identity separate from the victimhood. Yes, these things happen to us, it's not who we are. And so one thing that you see with Blackbeard is he's like, oh, it's everybody else is stupid or whatever, and he's gonna do what he wants because he wants to finally be himself. And you see that with a lot of the villains. I mean, even the cat guy, the cat pirate dude, he wanted to get some money. He wanted to rip off that sick girl and everything like that. But he felt like he was overlooked, by the family. That they thought they were treating him nicely, but he was still a servant. And he felt overlooked by them and by other pirates and everything like that. So he's going to do this because that's what he wants. It doesn't excuse it, but it does help us understand how did he get there. So when we're talking about using our fan interests to help us cope with our mental health, and if we are identifying with the villains, again, it's okay. Let's talk about, okay, that's how the villain did it. What were they seeking? Am I seeking something similar as the villain? And if so, what can I do differently? How can I do it in a more pro-social way?
There was something that was mentioned earlier about how certain characters, we identify with certain characters because then we can see the growth, right? And I think that's the one thing I love about using just any sort of story or fictional story to guide us. Because there's so much. I don't know, how many of you guys grew up in the era where everybody was don't watch TV because you can't learn anything from watching TV? Yeah, I hate that so much because that is not true. I learned so much from watching anime, a lot. And that's one thing that we can learn, right? So if, for example, if we identify with the character at the beginning of like their journey, and then later on they did X, Y, and Z, and then we're like, oh, that was not a good decision, then we can see that for ourselves. Okay, well, I need to go in a slightly different direction if I want better results, right? Or if the character does have really good results, then we can start imitating them. I sometimes am very shy at certain situations, and I don't know what to say or how to word things because my ADHD brain just kind of stops functioning sometimes. So I look at what the characters are saying, how they're interacting with each other, and then I'm like, oh, I really like that. I like that, you know, that they're very open, or that they're asking for help, or they're doing it in this specific way, and then I imitate that in real life, and then see if that works for me. And then I kind of like take on some of the characteristics, right? Especially of my favorite characters. Except for Sanji, like I still don't really like cooking. I still don't really like cooking. Like, that was my point. But there's so much we can learn from like each character, right? Even if they're like the bad guy in the scene. And this is really interesting too, because in most of other anime, I would say who the good guy and the bad guy is usually very clear, and pirates are technically not supposed to be good, but they are kind of like the good guys in this
Some of them are
sense.
good and some of them are bad. It's a lot more shades of gray.
So again, there's so many like life lessons we can learn from that, and especially if it's a story that is really well written, that will stand sort of like the test of time, kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender and One Piece, right? Like even if it's not done, like there's so much, like every time you go back and watch it, or every time you go back to read it, you'll remember something, or you'll get something from it, and that's what good writing does. And I love shows like that. Because it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving, right? Like we just keep going back to it. And I think there's also another layer, because I wanted to talk more about like, you know, how our fandoms can help our own mental health, right? And one layer is sort of like, oh, you know, I enjoy watching it, or I enjoy reading it. And another layer is like, I enjoy cosplaying, or I enjoy writing fan fiction or creating fan art, right? Because you're spending a lot more time with this character, and you're thinking a lot more about it, right? So whether, I mean, just being creative in any way, that's already like a great way to like cope with life. But it's almost like an embodiment of like the character, like a deeper sort of like connection. Because I do a lot of like podcasts and like podcasts and stuff for Psychology for Geeks on our YouTube, and one of the ones that I did, I think last year, was talking about how us grieving the death of a fictional character actually has a real impact on us, because they are like, I said it earlier, like they're like for us for real. So like we are connected to them, and our brain can't really tell the difference between being a real person or like a fictional character, because we have such a deep connection with the character. And so,
There's actually a term for that, a psychological term for that.
what is it?
Parasocial relationships. Also called fandom attachments. So we form these connections with people who are not actually in our lives physically, but they are real to us socially and emotionally.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, if I may make a comment, I think it's really interesting too, because Oda's really known for not killing off his characters. I mean, you have the guy from Alabasta that escaped the atomic bomb.
I was so
somehow,
happy. I was so happy.
and walked away with it and just like, I'm fine. But then you have other characters who you think, oh, they're gonna, you know, there's no way this could happen to this character, and then it just dies. And, like, I'm not going to spoil any more story when we see it, but it kind of is, I feel, like relevant to real life, where we feel like people in our lives, they have like such a huge impact that they're almost untouchable, and then when they pass, you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? And I think that's how Luffy, after his friend's death, that he has to go through a lot, and it's kind of relevant to what we have to do in our lives.
Before I say anything on that, I'm going to let you go.
Kind of on a similar vein, one of the best things I think psychologically for One Piece is that you can never judge the characters based on your first interactions. There are some characters that I legitimately, while watching, were like, there's no way I'm going to like this character. There's no way I'm going to enjoy this baby man, or why he's getting right, you know what I'm saying? But then
So
you
you're
learn more about them, or why they're doing the things they do, or look the way they do, and it just opens up a whole new world of like, wait a minute, why am I crying?
So that's actually why I asked that question earlier. If there are characters that when you first saw them you didn't like them, but later on you grew to like them, is because just like in the real world, sometimes we don't like things or people at first, but then the more we're exposed to them, the more we interact with them, the more we learn about them, then we can form a connection with them. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be our favorites, but it does actually relate to what you're talking about, which is like that issue of grief and everything. So grief and loss, while not one of my specialties, but Isaac is, so I hear him talk about it all the time, it's not linear. People talk about the stages of grief. It's not linear. People bounce around in those stages. They go back and forth, and even when you think you're fine for a while, it might still come back, and that's okay, because what grief is basically your attachment to this person continuing. To purposely misquote, Vision, it's love persevering, right? It is continuing bonds. We have this bond with this character, even after they died, they still are our favorite character. Or a person that we knew in real life, that like, just because they unfortunately passed away, doesn't mean that they aren't still important to us. And we can learn for ourselves, okay, well, what about this character did I really appreciate? And, can I embody that a little bit in my life? Can I bring a little bit of him into the real world? And that's another form of grief. That's another form of mourning and coping. It's that continuing bond.
Just one last question before we head to the, one last thing I wanted to add was, then the grief, I think sometimes as humans we want to, okay, where's the beginning and the end of this, right? And a lot of the times with grief there is no end. It just sort of transforms and it changes as we grow and as we continue to sort of like understand ourselves better. What was your question?
I wanted to backtrack a little bit about it, but I think everything you're saying is why watching shows can be so beneficial, because you're seeing all these different perspectives. And I was wondering if you had any tips for like how we make that shift from just watching a show to watch it, and then actually being able to reflect on it and bring that into our life.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's literally our whole job. At least it's my job. That's literally what I do. So no matter how you watch the show, that's good. You're watching a show, whether it's just to have background noise, fine. But if I'm understanding your question is basically, how can we go from, oh, this is just a show that I started watching, to how can I bring this into my real life? Well, I think it starts with finding what do you like about that show? What is keeping you coming back to that show? Let me open it up to the audience. What keeps you guys going back to One Piece?
The consistency. It's on every single week.
Consistency.
Wanting to see them succeed.
Wanting them to
That's a
succeed.
huge one, I think.
I want to see them find the freaking one. Notice, like, we're gonna finish in January.
I know, yeah. The journey. So we all have very similar, but also different reasons why we watch the same show, and that reason is something that we can use in our own lives. The journey. Are we all on our own journeys? Right? We're all trying to succeed in our own endeavors, our own quests. So how does Luffy, go on his journey? What is his outlook when he's setting sail for the first time? Can we do something like that for ourselves?
This is what I was talking about, where like cosplaying adds a different level of depth, right? Because sometimes when you're not being brave, or you're feeling really shy for things, it's kind of thinking about what would Luffy do, or what would Zoro do in this situation? Probably not get lost. Please don't do that. But there's a lot of things that we can just use, like little things, right? So one is, if it's like, which one is like your comfort arc, right? Like one of my siblings' favorite arc is Thriller Bark. So whenever you're feeling down or like a lot of things are happening, you're feeling overwhelmed, watch your comfort arc, right? That's one thing that you can do, just very basic thing. The other one is like if you are cosplaying or you're thinking about cosplaying this character, then just think to yourself more about like why do you like this character? Like is there something that you can like how can you be more like this character in real life? Like obviously a lot of like as far as I know, devil fruits are not really real, so those superpowers might not be possible. And for some reason, this is one of my things that I just was complaining so much about when I was recording the podcast for the previous arc that I read, which like, how can just drinking milk just like give you a time? Or like, repair your skull. That's we're not able to do that, but there's so many other things, right? Like there is this very impactful scenes when, I think it's for both for Robin and Nami, where they ask for help. Right? So sometimes we need to do that as well. We need to be a little bit more like those characters that we admire, or like the opposite too, right? Like, am I too similar to this one character that's like really annoying or that's making really bad decisions all the time? Should I like change a little bit?
Yeah. Well, it's like that question I asked earlier. Is when you connect with this character, is it because you see yourself or do you see how you want to be? And both of those are really useful when we are trying to turn this from more into just a show that I'm watching to something that can be beneficial for my health, for my sanity, is what do I want to be? What is my ideal self? We all have, the real and the ideal. The real is what we actually have. Like when you're looking in a mirror, that's your real, that's the way you actually look. And then there's the ideal, which is in our mind's eye, how we would like to look, what we want to strive for, the quest that we want to go on, whether it be internal or external. And so when you're watching these shows and you see a character that even if you don't like them, you still see something about them that you want for yourself, oh, okay. You know what, he may not be my favorite character, but he's got his point here. You know what, I'm going to learn how to cook because I need to cook. Or not, whatever.
Just find
I just like his mustache, okay? That's so wrong. I want a mustache like that. So we all can find this throughout the entire series. And One Piece is really phenomenal because it's been going on for decades.
Yep.
Or more. There's so many characters, and as our friend over here mentioned, not all of them die. Like, very few characters die in One Piece, which is really interesting because then you get to see so much more options of ways to do things. Yeah.
There's also those forgettable deaths where you're like, oh yeah, that person died. Like, you always have that in, at least, it doesn't matter if it's One Piece or any other, but in One Piece there are those few deaths where people are like, oh yeah, then they're like, I forgot about that. And it's like the most obscure character there, you're like, right.
Yeah, it does happen. And even then, we can still take something from that if it brings up some memory from when we first met that character.
I wanted to continue sort of like talking a little bit more about how we can use it to like continue leveling up like our own journey, because I just remember this. But one way that's really easy for us to do is just we're at a con. Coming to places where people are like-minded, like there's so many, I love going to conventions because we can talk about the things that we love, and it's so amazing to see someone else have the same or similar love for something that's like very obscure or for like our own family doesn't really understand, right? I live in like the middle of nowhere, California, so it's really difficult to find like other geeks. So coming to conventions, it's like great. It's like 3 days of like me going on vacation and like doing a lot of like self-care, right? And also there's a lot of merch to be found here. And if you put it somewhere in your space, it becomes your safe space, right? Because you're constantly seeing, like, I love One Piece, but my favorite character is Loki. And then so I have him everywhere in my room. And it just I look at it and I'm like, it's just so cute. Or like, I just love him so much, right? And that makes me happy. And sometimes we have really difficult days. and looking at something that we really love, or like that one figurine that we saved for so long to be able to buy, you know, it brings us that little bit of peace. We have about 5 more minutes, so if you guys have questions, shout them out and we try to answer them as fast as we can. So we have more questions.
It was not more of a question, it's more like a comment.
Okay.
I love how we're just reflecting on like characters who don't die as much. There are series where a death hits so much that people just quit the show. I'm an advocate for more to a lot. And so when a certain person or thing occurs, people kind of just drop and said it's not even worth watching anymore. And
Yeah.
It's just nice to hear, you know, these people love them.
That's actually a really good point, yeah, because that fandom attachment, you love that character so much that going back to their show after they pass, it takes something away from it.
It's kind of like how ready you are, right? Like to move on. That's why I love fan fiction so much, because Luke is always alive.
Yeah.
There was a question back there. I think somebody was saying.
Do you think Big Mom and Hyder are dead?
Wait, I'm sorry. What was that?
Way to spoil it.
Do you think that?
Sorry, I just started Wano, so. Oh no! Was that a big
lost them all.
spoiler?
Now they're on page.
No,
Sorry.
everybody.
You'll
Okay, I
know
heard
eventually.
nothing.
Just forget about it. It's fine.
Any questions that are not specific to like specifics in the show, because we're all at various different points in the show or the manga.
We'll go back there.
Yeah, for those of us that aren't watching it, what exactly is the psychology of the One Piece? Is it supposed to be something that gives them power, gives them wealth? Is it something to bring them happiness, like gives them a wish? Or is this, what exactly is behind the One Piece? What is it?
Yes.
I think.
It's whatever the person wants the most, because so far as I'm aware, we have not yet been told more specifics about the actual One Piece itself. And so for every different person seeking it, it means something different. So behind the psychology behind that is the idea of what is important to you. What do you seek to attain in your life?
To improve your life, a lot of them is life improvement, right? Whether it's more power or more money, or like becoming the king of the pirates. Just like the question that we asked earlier, like why did you guys keep watching One Piece, or like, you know, or why you're in the fandom? It was different for everybody. So I think it's different in the One Piece universe for like the people that are seeking it, and I think it's also different for us. Right, like why we continue and what it's giving
It
to
just matters,
us.
what does it mean to you as an individual?
So it's not an actual physical like piece of a puzzle or something.
So far as I'm aware,
We have no questions.
we don't know that.
We don't know.
I've actually I'm probably the furthest behind of everyone in this room in the manga and the show, so I know the least about the specifics. But the idea of having a One Piece that we're always striving for in psychology, there's not a specific term for that, but we all have that. We all have goals that we try to achieve. We all have core values of things that are important to us. So to me, I see that as just a reflection of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, this is a bit of a heavy hitter. But,
Okay, way to end it off with a heavy hitter.
Garp is one of the major characters, and Luffy's his grandson. And they have a really interesting relationship in the show that they don't have the same values and ideals, but they still care for each other. And I guess for me, I have someone in my life who I really care for them, but we are so completely different that we completely diverted on our paths. And it's one of my family members. And so I guess my question is, how do you still love and care for people like that who maybe don't care for you as much, but you still want to?
I think there is, I went on this rant about that specifically because I think it's so cool about how he parents essentially like Luffy and Ace, right? Like they essentially are doing like the complete opposite of what Garp wanted them to be or do, but he is allowing them because for Garp the most important thing is their freedom, right? And then so he's allowing them to have their freedom. Everybody wants, he wants everybody to have that freedom to choose whatever it is, whatever path they want, right? And that doesn't mean just because they didn't follow the path that he wanted, like he's loving them any less. And I think a lot of the times, we focus a lot on like the little things, so like, well, he said I looked ugly, or like he gave me the side eye, right? Or like, he smells or whatever. And we focus a lot, so much on that, and then we forget about what our own values are. So sometimes we have to focus on like, what kind of relationship are you wanting to have? Like what kind of, sibling you want to be? What kind of, child-parent relationship you want to have? And sometimes it works out great, where we're like, oh, we're gonna change a little bit, and I'm gonna think more about my value system, and it's gonna become a great relationship. Sometimes it works like that, sometimes it doesn't, right? But it kind of is more on us, like what we want to be, because we have the freedom to choose that.
Yeah, and also it's really important to just, so you hear the word acceptance a lot, and people are like, oh, you need to accept this. What does it mean to accept? Acceptance does not mean that you are okay with it. It just means that you're acknowledging that this is what it is, and it's not something that is for you to choose. I'm sure you're not alone in having family members that don't always agree with you. We can accept that people have different values and still care for them, because those two things they're not, always have to be together. I can accept that somebody is different from me and still want the best for them. One is love and compassion and empathy, and the other is wanting them to be exactly like you, which is more of a sense of control. So when you find yourself kind of feeling frustrated that they're not liking the same things as you, they don't value the same things as you, what does it mean to you to have somebody that does share those values? And if we can't have it from this person, we can still love them in that way. Then can we seek out that connection in another place where they do share the same values?
Yeah. And
that's the whole idea of found family and the crews on the ships and the pirate ships. You gotta find your own crew.
Yeah, because sometimes we want a certain type of parenting style that for some reason or another we're not able to receive, so find it in somewhere else. Sometimes it's like in a friend who's like more, a parent-like, just naturally, and that's okay, as long as we were able to have our own needs met, right? So okay, we don't have that much time.
Yeah,
So again, sort of like an outro for this panel. I am the founder and CEO of Psychology for Geeks. We're a nonprofit that merges psychology, mental health, and all over fandoms. So please check us out. We are pretty much in every social media except for X or Twitter. I just couldn't figure out how to use that one. So we are at Psych for the number 4 Geeks, or you can just Google psychologyforgeeks.com and you'll find us there as well. And please stop by our booth and get one of our cards or ask us questions if you're interested. We are more than happy to geek out. That's why I'm here.
And I'm Dr. Benjamin Tynes. I'm the co-host of Mental Health Quest and My Hero Therapy podcast. You can find those on all the social media at MHQ Podcast and at My Hero Therapy. Mental Health Quest is a podcast where we talk about what is mental illness and mental health and how does treatment look for that, helping people find, that understanding of their mental health. And then My Hero Therapy is about the psychology of the My Hero Academia anime. We are a bit on a hiatus for both of those podcasts because my co-hosts and I just have a lot going on in the real world. But hopefully soon we will get back to having more episodes. So please follow us and have a wonderful rest of your time. Also, at 12:30 in this same room, we're going to be doing a panel about Jujutsu Kaisen.
Yeah.
So if you like that show, also just join us then at 12:30, the same room.
Yeah, if you're interested in learning more about too, like the mental health things in like every arc of One Piece, I do have like a podcast that I do with my sibling on the Psychology for Geeks YouTube, so you can sort of like follow along my journey. And yeah.
Thank you all.
Have fun at the con.
Thank you.